in the North Fork. The Little North Fork, for some reason through the years, we've just kind of missed it, but there is some opportunity to catch coho in the Little North, and so we're proposing to open that season for coho salmon similar to what it is in the main stem, just to provide that additional opportunity and reduce that confusion for the public that's out there. There's no conservation concern here. These fish originate from a hatchery stock originally. They are just kind of there for opportunity for anglers to harvest. Now there is a seasonal, you'll see a season gap there where we want to have it closed for a period of time, and that's to protect any of the adult Chinook salmon that end up in that water body. And that's, again, the same regulation as you have in the neighboring waters. Into Central Oregon, a couple of examples here. One, I wanted to make sure we specifically highlighted the Metolius Pond. The Metolius Pond is a recent created pond on our ODFW property where the old Metolius hatchery used to sit. There's been a lot of public feedback on the timing of when the pond is open. Right now the pond is open year-round. We're proposing to modify that to leave it only have it open from May 1st through October 31st based on some extensive public scoping. In addition, it'll provide some additional protection and some user conflict that may occur out there, as that pond in certain times of the years is used as an acclimation facility for the reintroduction above Pelt Round Butte. So it does kind of provide that little gap in there where we can protect those smolts that are in that pond. The other one in the Central Zone is up in the Fall River. A couple of proposals there in the fall. One is to require the release of wild rainbow trout, just to protect those very important species up there. The other one would modify the Fall River below Fall River Falls from a May through September time frame to be consistent with the main stem Deschutes River and to protect wild spawning rainbow trout in that area. Up to the Northeast Zone. This is one that came up because of everything that was going on the past couple of years at steelhead. And the default regulation that we have in the area is that it's open all year for hatchery steelhead. And so the way that our bass fisheries tend to work is the bass fishery is open when there's an open salmon, steelhead, or trout fishery. So when we closed the hatchery steelhead fishery, we inadvertently closed the bass and catfish fishery. So we did do a temporary rule last year. Very popular fishery in the early spring up there. So what we're proposing is that we'll maintain the open all year for bass, catfish, and other warm water fish from the mainline railroad bridge to the north to the confluence at the North Fork, just to make sure that those fisheries remain open during that whole year time frame. Talking to the districts, worried about is there going to be any kind of is there going to be any bycatch that goes on? But according to the districts, there's very little bycatch due to the different gear types that you use. So there's not, at least from the district's perspective, there's not a significant concern to leave it open year-round. So, believe it or not, that's all I really have, except I'll just mention that as part of what goes into the regulation book, the commission did do some additional actions throughout the course of the last year. There's also some legislative actions that took place. So just wanted to bring to your attention that we'll be also incorporating into the book all the information about the Rogue South Coast Plan and the new license requirements for that. So you can see up here on the screen, we'll be placing a map in the zone so that people know where they need to utilize or have to utilize the new validation and the licenses. So we're going to provide a lot of information in there, still working on the final language there. And then also just a couple of months ago, I think it was back in March, you all approved some modifications to European green crab as a 35 crab limit, and then also restricted sea star harvest. So those will also be implemented into the, placed into the book for 23. And then we had some legislative action that occurred that combined our daily angling and shellfish license. So we'll be making some modifications to our license table as well, just to make sure that we're incorporating that. And that's all I have. Staff recommendation is to accept staff recommended proposals to readopt the 2022 sport fishing regulations and administrative rule for 23, as shown in attachment 3, accept the staff recommended proposal as shown as attachment 4, and then also to authorize staff to update any necessary calendar dates in the regulations, make any formatting changes to correct spelling or grammar errors, and address any inadvertent inconsistencies to improve readability. And that is all I have, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mike, and that was a speedy run-through of that. I
Trying to do the best I
appreciate it. We have a couple questions, and then we have 3 people who would like to testify. So, Commissioner King.
Thank you, Chair. Well, thanks, Mike. Nice to meet you. I think we met on screen at some stage. But you may remember my question. The poor lost people, I was one of them, looking for the shellfish regs somewhere in the sport licensing. So did we make that a little bit more obvious, or maybe put a picture of a crab or something, particularly for folks where English isn't their first language? It was really tough to find those.
Chair Wall, Commissioner King, yeah, we are going to make some I didn't mention that particularly, but I have notes. This is the master guide right here that shows all my notes. But I do have notes. We're going to add some new information to the table of contents to kind of help direct people there. And then we're actually going to look at relabeling the title of the section where all the crab information and clamming information is, because now it uses more technical terms like marine invertebrates, and
right.
People are like, what the heck is
what
that?
Is that? Exactly.
Right, so we're going to try to make that a little more clear as to what is in that section.
Well, thank you. Thank you, because like I said, I was in Fisherman's Marine, the one at Oregon City with the collapsing dock, that one.
Mm-hmm.
But really, I watch people really struggle to find it.
Sure. Yeah. No,
So,
that's great. Yeah,
so glad that you fixed that. I think that will help a lot of people.
Thank you. Commissioner Labhart,
Okay.
then I have one question.
So just for the record, just want you to say yes to this, hopefully. You've talked with state police, both fish and or both on the fishery side, and they don't have any issues with enforcement of any of these proposed changes. Is that correct?
Yeah, he's shaking his head.
Okay,
Good to go.
I just want to make sure, 'cause it's so
yeah,
important.
We do share this every time it goes.
Yeah, it's so important that we don't put some kind of rule in here and go, well, we can't enforce that. And so, yeah, just want to make sure. Thank you.
I have a quick question about the legal framework that we're working on with these, because on Sea Stars and on a couple others, I noticed in the rule it was crossed off, and it's because it's in the book. So I want to just make sure that I understand it, and I think this is a you question, but otherwise it could be yours. But is it the case that whether it's in the book or in rule, they are equally enforceable and changes to either would come here?
Chair Wall, I can. That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm so used to looking to the rules as the ultimate authority, and it's silent now on Sea Stars, so.
No, it's because the rule incorporates
The book. It's just a piece that those of us reading it need to pay attention to, because it's in both places, and it's almost like the book is the main one.
That's right.
Pardon me?
Oh, Bob has his card.
Bob, is your card up because you'd like a, or is it stuck?
I was going to make an observation, was one that was, yeah, that's, I grew up riding my bicycle, fishing bass in farm ponds all over the valley here. So yeah, it's definitely a good way to introduce kids to fishing. And then the other thing, of course, if we didn't need a license to fish bass, everybody that didn't have a license, I'm sure, would be fishing bass after that.
Then, thank you all. Mike, if you will stay close, we have 3 people, I think, Donald Davis, David Moskowitz, and at one point I had James Frazier on here. Is he still on, Michelle?
Mr. Frazier couldn't stay any longer. He had to leave, so he
Makes sense. Okay. Donald Davis and then David Moskowitz. And if you both want to come up at the same time, that's just fine. And thank you for sticking with us all this time.
Yes.
Thank you for hearing me. I think it's been a long day for you folks.
I wouldn't argue with that.
Sure. I've been here a couple times before.
Okay, sure.
I'm going to yield to you.
Chairperson Wall, commission members, thank you for allowing me to testify before you today. My full name is Donald Ray Davis. I'm better known as Don Davis. and I'm a resident of Sandy, Oregon. I'm also the democratically elected president of an organization known as the Oregon Bass and Panfish Club. The Oregon Bass and Panfish Club is comprised of approximately 200 avid warm water fishermen who work often hand in hand with the Department of Fish and Wildlife to improve opportunities for warm water fishermen. Our mission statement is as follows. The purposes for which the Oregon Bass and Panfish Club is organized are to encourage and stimulate interest in angling for warm water game fish, to perpetuate said fish in waters adaptable to the species, to seek to procure better fishing for said fish through efforts of this club and through cooperation with all other organizations and agencies with similar objectives, to assist in the observance and enforcement of game laws, and to fight pollution in all the waters of Oregon. The Oregon Bass and Panfish Club Incorporated is a 501c3 organization. Now, I might add that we also keep the warm water records for Oregon. I'm here today to encourage you not to lift the size and bag limits of bass on all the flowing waters in Oregon. The approximately 200 members of the Oregon Bass and Panfish Club, and I believe a huge majority of the large number of anglers statewide who fish for Oregon's warm water species, believe that this is not the best way to simplify Oregon's fishing regulations or to provide better fishing opportunities for so-called native species. Bass and other warm water species have been in Oregon since the mid-1800s, along with other non-native species, including white, black, and Hispanic people, domestic farm animals such as cows, horses, pigs, chickens, etc., and agricultural products such as wheat, pears, cherries, apples. Oregon has become a great state with its many diverse non-natives, and they should all be respected. I support your efforts to simplify the regulations, but regulations for bass in most waters are already fairly simple. 5 per day, no more than 3 over 15 inches, no more than 3 daily bag limits in possession. And I will agree, as terrible as it is, that catch and keep as many as you can would be simpler. But since the bass regulations are already simple, I think we should look elsewhere to simplify regulations. I think that standardizing regulations for flowing waters statewide would be a misguided effort. Different waters are not standard. In some cases, they are very different and should be looked at individually in order to conserve the resource while providing fishing opportunities. I was very interested in the comments about the coquille that I heard earlier today. The board of directors of the Oregon Bass and Panfish Club decided not to have a position on that. Some of them were, well, the reason we're a warm water club, but we understand the reasons for removing the bass from that river. But some of our members were a little bit concerned about the way they are removed by some spear fishing, for example. It would be nice if we could remove them while they're alive, and the Oregon Bass and Panfish Club, I know, could borrow a transport truck and find them a nice new home. But Oregon is not alone in having fishing regulations that are confusing sometimes. Our neighbor to the north, Washington State, is competitive in this area. And the one-day fishing license that I bought earlier this year in Oklahoma still has me scratching my head. As far as removing bass to provide conservation of native resource and provide better fishing opportunities for those fish, I'm not so sure. I heard a comment about that earlier today. I haven't seen any evidence that diminished bass numbers create more trout.
If-
It's a fact, big fish eat little fish. I'm not much of a trout guy. I would imagine big trout eat little trout. But would this, by itself, be a good reason to remove big trout? The Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife has acknowledged that climate change is occurring. Ambient temperatures and water temperatures are increasing and setting records almost every year.
Mr.
Some of the
Davis, if you
increases
could-
are exponential.
If you could wrap up.
I
Yeah.
will.
Okay,
Another 30 seconds?
okay, but yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. We've been here a long time.
I know you
That
have.
beautiful lady back there is my new wife, and we've sat here about 3 hours.
I know you have, and I'm sorry for that.
Thank
and
you, that's
we're just trying to
fine.
get
Thank you.
everybody home.
I read a scientific article a few years ago that fishing in Portland, Oregon, or in that area, will soon be like fishing in Sacramento, California, because of climate change. I think we should work on increasing the numbers of bass, catfish, walleye, and other warm water species, and the fishing opportunities that come with that. I implore you not to decimate the bass living in Oregon's flowing waters. I have great-grandchildren. I'm older than any of you, I think, but I'll bet all of you have children and grandchildren, and we need to conserve this resource for them. I'm asking that you not decimate the bass populations in Oregon's flowing waters. That concludes my testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to me, and I did go a little over. I'm sorry.
It's all, no, you get some credit for staying all day long in order to deliver
Thank you.
this, so
You're
thank
very
you.
gracious.
Go ahead, Dave. You aren't gonna get any consideration.
He already used it. He already used it. He
That's
used
right.
his in advance.
We do appreciate you being here all day too, though, Dave.
Yeah. Thank you. Chair Wall, Vice Chair Zarnowitz, members of the Commission, Director Melcher, David Moskowitz with Conservation Angler. My background, I grew up outside of Philadelphia and rode my Schwinn, my tackle box, bungee corded to the rack, and basically fished all the farm ponds. First using bait and then flies, but we stocked our own pond with those bass when people would allow us to take them. So it was that's deep in my personal background. However, having moved to Oregon, I'm definitely a cold water fishery guy, and the groups I've worked with since working for the Northwest Steelheaders, we have seen the effects of bass and other invasive species. So TCA supports removing this limit, and we would urge you to adopt that rule. I'd like to make comment on one other rule, and that's the one on the John Day. Apparently there was the change of the hatchery fishery closing, and it closed the warm water fishery in the winter. I talked to the district biologist when they lifted that. I think it was in February or March. I think it was a temporary rule then. We had a good conversation. He spoke to me in detail about the catfish fishery that happens in the John Day, and that's kind of different gear, different sort of places. But bass fishing is it's the same. You can catch steelhead with bass gear. And I think our concern about this, leaving it open all year, just to look at the Deschutes. When the Deschutes closed this year, or did not open, the bass fishing was closed. And there's a good reason for that. So we're a little concerned about this just wide open all year. Obviously, there's good reason the catfish fishery is kind of a winter fishery, but the bass fishery is not really a winter fishery. So we would ask for a little more precision in this particular rule. He made a very good case, the district biologist made a very good case about the catfish fishery, and felt like there were no conflicts. So, and generally said people aren't really fishing for bass in that winter time. So we would ask you to consider an amendment that allowed the catfish fishery but not the bass fishery in those winter months. The steelhead could use a a break, perhaps. But when it's closed, it should be closed to bass fishing as well. That's our point on that. And I really appreciate the opportunity to testify. And looks like I'm just barely sliding under the deadline. So I'm getting better on that. Thanks for your service today. It's been a long day. And happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I see no cards up for questions, so I think if we could, if Mike, you would come back up and we'll finish this one. Thank you both. Commissioners, any last questions of Mike? Or Mike, any comment, especially on that last one, the catfish?
Sure,
the
well, yeah,
bycatch.
I can comment. I talked to the district biologist as well. The early spring bass fishery is very popular. The fish are very active coming off spawning grounds, and so it is a popular fishery. Now, the reason why it closed is, again, because we closed hatchery steelhead, and hopefully we're going to be in a place where we won't have to be doing that very often. I mean, I think last year was and maybe this year is one of those cases. But if it was open for hatchery steelhead year-round, like it would be by the fall rule, it would also be open for bass.
Jeez.
So, the Deschutes and the district bios there, and the way the water flows and all those things in bass and the Deschutes, even though they're there, certainly is not nearly as many bass as it is in the John Day. But that was the feeling when they closed that bass fishery in conjunction with the steelhead, was that gear type was a concern. Again, this fishery for the bass kind of is more down towards that reservoir, the backwater area, of the John Day, where it kind of flows from the Columbia. And that's why the districts want to make sure we're maintaining that opportunity, because they got a lot of phone calls. And then we ended up in a temporary rule to open it when we closed it for the hatchery steelhead, because there's a lot of people that are very passionate about getting up there in the early springtime. So that's the comment I have.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like one follow-up question. I think it comes to you, Kurt. If we spent a lot of time on the Columbia River and trying to figure out what to do when the steelhead were having trouble. If we closed the John Day in that case, it would be closed for everything, including the warm water?
Well, I'm not sure if I understand the precise context of your question. And so you're talking about when we closed the Columbia to protect, and the
we did
Deschutes
some
and the
trips.
John Day to protect wild summer steelhead. No, we did not close it to trout.
That's right.
It was still open for trout.
Okay.
So I think for me, this question about bass, or smallmouth bass fishing in this case in the John Day, it's really about which do you think has the most risk or the most benefit? Removing non-native species that are piscivorous and eat juveniles?
Yep.
And while you're doing that, have some chance of encountering in a catch and release way steelhead, or just letting them sit there and eat. So
Yeah.
and
Okay.
and then there's just the collateral benefits of angler opportunity that goes with it. So
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Commissioners, sense of the commission, is anybody ready to make a motion here? Or additional questions? You get to go home at the end of it, so.
not quite.
Oh,
We got a
that's right,
couple
we
of-
have one of,
I'll make the motion then. I move to amend OAR Chapter 635, Divisions 011, 013, 014, 016, 017, 018, 019, 021, 023, and 039 as proposed by staff in Attachment 3, and I move to adopt the modifications to regulations proposed by staff as described in Attachment 4. And I also authorize staff to update necessary calendar dates and make formatting changes to correct spelling or grammar errors and to address inadvertent inconsistencies to improve readability.
is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded on Exhibit D as was read into the record. Any final questions? Then, could you call the roll, Michelle?
Labhart,
Lampard votes aye.
King,
Yes.
Hatfield Hyde.
Yes.
Spellbrink,
Yes.
Zarnowitz,
Yes.
Wall.
Yes. Is Khalil still?
She's
gone.
yeah.
Thank you. Then, Director, you have a couple items?
Sure, I wanted to just remind you all that your computers are down here, they're ready.
Thanks, Mike.
And I think Michelle has them properly labeled so you get the right ones before you head home. And then thanks, obviously, for a lengthy meeting. Thanks for indulging us with the Agency Pride Awards and working an hour of overtime today, which your paychecks will duly not reflect. But neither will mine. But then I just also wanted, Michelle has ordered Hydro Flask tumblers for each of you, and they're here. So I want to hand those out before you all leave for the evening. And that's all I had.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you. That was
So you can adjourn.
I
We are
think
adjourned.
in response
And
to
thank
us
you, Mike.
complaining about plastic, I imagine.
What'd you say?
I said in response to us complaining about plastic, getting reusable water bottles. Yeah.
You have to remember to bring them.
Exactly.
Thank you, everybody, for staying with us that long. And I bet your paycheck will reflect how long you were here too, right?
We do have Commissioner Daniels too, but we'll just hold it forward.
Perfect. Thank you. Perfect.